Joe Biden's CIA director, who was the CIA director for the entire war up until Donald Trump just came back in, he wrote the Niet means Niet memo to Condoleezza Rice, a private cable to the then Secretary of State when he was ambassador to Russia, to let her know that this flirting with bringing Ukraine into NATO is gonna end up in a war. And by the way, the Russians don't want to do it. His words exactly. If you keep pushing with this, the Russians are going to have to make a decision that they don't want to make, which is whether they intervene or not. And number two, Stoltenberg, if I might be butchering that again, but the head of NATO, he himself said that Vladimir Putin sent him a draft treaty in late 2021 and said, look, if you just put into writing that you will not bring Ukraine into NATO, I won't invade. Now, if you want to argue that
I admire your appeal to authority to the head of the CIA.
It's not an appeal to authority.
Well,
how is that an appeal to authority?
You regard the view of the CIA director on that occasion as being useful for your argument. But secondly, secondly, there's an oddity to believing what Vladimir Putin says.
No, wait, hold on, but you didn't let me finish my point.
Okay.
So don't believe what he says. I'm not going to pretend to read his heart and mind or something like that, but at the very least, you handed him the giant excuse in order to do it. I mean, maybe he doesn't really believe it, but this is his argument to his own people and to the world, that it's like, look, and we put him in a position, if you hate Vladimir Putin, he's such a terrible guy, well, we put him in this position where he gets to now very plausibly say to the international community, in the same way that if the Soviet Union had survived and the United States hadn't, and they were.
He doesn't very plausibly have the opportunity to do that. He invaded Ukraine because he wanted to annex the whole country, because he was trying to pretend that the whole place had been run by Nazis.
Well, I mean, okay, the whole place wasn't run by Nazis. There's certainly worse than Nazis there.
This is what he told the Russian people.
He also brought up, listen, when he announced...
You can lie an awful lot when you're a dictator, and you have the ability not just to run all of the media, but to kill your political opponents. I mean, you can do an awful lot.
Sure.
None of this... I just got back from Ukraine again the other week, and it's so weird. I saw the Oval Office meeting as it happened from a trench in the front line between the Russian and Ukrainian positions in the east of the country. And it was so weird seeing the way in which this country's territory was being talked about by outsiders, and particularly by America, because there's so many oddities about it. But the people who are fighting there, the soldiers on the front lines, like the ones I was with, they're not fighting against Putin forces because of NATO expansion or anything. They're fighting because he lied to his own army, he lied to his own people, he lies to the world, and he decided he wanted to gobble up Ukraine because he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And as a result, these young men are in dugouts in the middle of winter fighting Russian soldiers because the Ukrainians' homes are 30 kilometers behind them. And I think, among much else, that's stuff that cannot be forgotten about. None of this is simply about NATO expansion or this or that. It's about a country whose people are suffering in their third year of war. And it's almost total war. It's as much total war as we've got in the modern age. And
But that's not. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm not saying the Ukrainian people were fighting because they wanted to keep their country. People don't very much like being invaded by foreign countries. I understand that completely, and I've also always said throughout this whole thing that is their right. They have a right to do that. We as Americans have a right to, have an opinion on whether our government ought to be funding and arming the thing. But all I'm saying is that I'm not making an appeal to authority here. I'm just saying that you have the top people in the Russian government all unanimously saying, like, this is our red line. You keep flirting with NATO expansion into Ukraine. And then you have all the people at the top of NATO and at the top of the U.S. government admitting it too. And going like, this is the whole beef. So why is it like these two things aren't mutually exclusive?
No, they aren't. But I mean, they weren't going to expand NATO to Ukraine.
Well, they kept flirting with it, and this.
The Ukrainians wanted membership, and it was very unwise whenever anyone from the rest of the West even flirted with it.
Didn't Kamala Harris openly say that NATO was going to join you?
Yeah, shortly before
Ukraine
the war.
was going to join NATO?
Yeah, I never saw her as the Kissinger of our era.
Which I agreed. Now there's some area of agreement,
That's
Douglas,
Tim
that
Walz.
we can come.
He's the
He's the guy for that.
Well, obviously, that guy's the future. But okay, but it is still the vice president of the United States of
sure.
America, and it's
But
it's
again,
not just.
again, that's not why Putin invaded. But
Well,
I mean,
you can
he
assert
invaded.
that,
He
but-
invaded because of the thing he's dreamt of since he falling down of the Soviet Union. Is
Do you know how he dreams?
We know a lot from what he's said and what he's done since the fall of the Soviet Union and his statements. Certainly, very early on in his presidency.
Right,
he's
but if he does have a
continued.
red line and you violate that red line, is that because he's following his dreams, or it's because
His dream is, as he's said many times, is the reconstitution of the Soviet Union's territory.
I don't think that's exactly what he's said. He's alluded many times to like how great the Soviet Union was and what a tragedy it is that it collapsed and things like that. But regardless,
Something we can agree is
What?
a fiction on his part. I mean,
I think the
was a
Soviet Union
disaster,
collapsing is
yeah.
one of the greatest things that's ever happened in the history of the world. One of the most
very
evil
largely,
regimes, if
yes,
not
and
the
very
most
largely
evil
the
regime.
result of American action.
Sure, there were a lot of factors in there,
Just
but
trying
yes,
to throw in some pro-American views.
I will certainly concede that us luring them into Afghanistan played a huge role in weakening the Soviet Union. It came with the minor little price tag of 9/11.
that was the-
but okay, that's but you know that's
the Soviet Union did not fall just because of Afghanistan.
no, I didn't say. I said it played a role. I didn't say it was just because of Afghanistan.
The main thing
no,
was the
it was because
stationing of European
well,
troops. throughout
also
the
because
Western
communism as an economic model just doesn't work, and it
Right.
was a disaster, and it was destined to
We
collapse.
can
Like
agree on that.
all centrally planned, totally socialist economies are destined
Except
for
that,
bad
yeah,
results.
I don't like the word destined in that because, I mean, in my experience, things that don't work can go on an awfully long time.
Well, look, the Soviet Union went on an awfully long time. I mean, it was.
I thought when I went to North Korea some years ago that couldn't go on for much longer, and on it goes.
Yeah, no, okay, so
You know.
fair point there, but certainly it's going to be, it's a much different dynamic for a communist country like North Korea, who is a relatively small and not expansionist, whereas the Soviet Union was trying to maintain an empire, which is a much tougher thing to do. Look, the United States of America is going broke trying to do it, so it was pretty tough for them to do. All I'm saying here is that, like, if the dynamic, again, it's not just that, like, first off, in 2008 at the Bucharest summit, we announced we were doing it. Now, we didn't give them a map plan, but we announced they are coming into NATO. Over and over, not just the Kamala Harris comment, over and over and over again through the years, people at the highest level of the U.S. government asserted that this is going to happen, that it's a matter of time.